Why do people love swearing and sex in one show and hate it in another? What's the difference between the humor in shows like Panty and Stocking versus shows like Hazbin Hotel? And more importantly, how do you write a smart poop joke? In this video, I'm going to talk about how swears and sex can ruin good shows like Hazbin Hotel, analyze the 3 parts of any good joke, and explain why these same fans love the adult humor in Panty and Stocking but hate it in Hazbin Hotel. And some of those reasons can actually be explained with this post right here. Now, for context, Panty and Stocking is an anime about 2 angels that swear and have lots of sex, and Hazbin Hotel is a show about demons that swear and have lots of sex. So the joke here is that the same fans love the sex and swearing in Panty and Stocking, but they hate the exact kind of humor in Hazbin Hotel. It is a bit of an oversimplification, but as a fan of both shows, I can say it's a good depiction of a problem people have had with Hazbin Hotel and Hell of a Boss for years. Namely that fans feel like the level of swearing and sex and poop jokes in the shows is just cringy. In fact, this discussion went viral last week when Panty and Stocking dropped a musical episode where the entire musical was a bunch of swears, and half of Twitter said that the episode must have been written by Pop, the creator of Hazbin Hotel. And while there are different reasons for this level of vitriol, it's best explained by this comment to the Twitter post that says, "The difference is Panty and Stocking is ironic and isn't meant to be taken seriously, while Hazbin Hotel wants to have serious topics within very juvenile humor." Basically, both of these are supposed to be adult animation, but Hazbin Hotel does this by trying to be both mature and immature, while Panty and Stocking is completely immature and somehow feels smarter, which is something that fans of these shows are clearly feeling, but nobody's really saying what the underlying problem is. Part of it is the shows taking themselves seriously or not, but the larger issue is the degree to which the creators know their audiences. Studio Trigger makes no attempt to be mature, so fans are perfectly happy watching 30 minutes of swear songs. On the other hand, there has been a growing disconnect between Pop and fans of her shows, and the claim is that it's because her shows are meant for adults but use dialogue written for 13-year-olds. In other words, Hazbin Hotel would actually feel more mature if it didn't have so much adult language. Although I guess adult isn't the best term for the dialogue since so many people call it juvenile. That brings up an even bigger problem. If using adult jokes and humor isn't actually mature, then what makes a show adult in the first place? And this is why it's so important that creators know their audience, because what makes a show adult is actually the viewers. Obviously, the difference between a show for babies and a show for adults is usually advertised in age restrictions. But that's just it. There's a big difference between restrictions and appeal. Think of it like an amusement park. You can label certain rides as kiddie rides and adult rides, but that doesn't make the adult rides any more appealing to adults when rides are kind of meant for kids in the first place. The same is true for shows and movies. Just because you give something an M rating or an R rating doesn't make it mature. There's a huge difference between target demographics and intended viewers. Making a story mature isn't about using swears and sex jokes. It's about writing the story and its characters in a way that appeals to viewers who enjoy more mature topics, regardless of how old they are. This is why people like anime so much. Shows like Naruto and Bleach are targeted at kids, but they handle the characters and plot in a way that is clearly more mature than something like SpongeBob. This is the problem with Hazbin Hotel as well as Hell of a Boss. These shows appeal to older viewers because they involve discussions about sexual assault, individual identity, and moral integrity, but they talk about these things with dialogue that often feels like it was written by a 13-year-old boy who just discovered the internet. People find these same exact swears and the same exact jokes funny in Panty and Stocking because that is not a mature show. The fact that Studio Trigger adds transformation scenes just as an excuse to draw ridiculously detailed shots of the characters doing strip dance routines is a pretty obvious sign that the show shouldn't be taken seriously. It's meant for adults and it is smart in the sense that it's creative, but it's clearly not supposed to appeal to people looking for mature stories. It's meant for immature viewers who want a silly story, but it's still an adult show because it uses so much adult humor. But to that point, you could argue that Panty and Stocking's shameless use of adult humor doesn't make it any better. In fact, that's how a lot of people responded to the new musical episode, claiming that it was no better than Hazbin Hotel's use of swearing and sex. Which might seem true out of context, but people such as myself who have seen both shows can tell you there's a big difference. Panty and Stocking doesn't actually swear that much. In fact, I'd be willing to bet there's even less swearing in Panty and Stocking than there is in Hazbin Hotel, especially in this second season where Trigger has actually pretty much cleaned up the writing compared to the original season. And that's because the writers at Studio Trigger understand something a lot of people don't realize. They understand that swearing is basically like salt. Salt makes most food taste better, but that only works if you can still taste your food. If all you taste is salt, then you just ruined the food. It's the same with swearing and sex and any crude humor. You can improve writing with swears, but if you use more than you need, then all you can taste is the swear. And swears aren't inherently funny out of context. Now, to that point, you might say, well, okay, chef, then how much swearing do you really need? And the truth is, it's usually zero. A lot of times, swearing is just a crutch for what would otherwise be painfully unfunny. For example, I recently came across this 2009 movie by Rob Zombie called The Haunted World of El Super Bisto, and this movie is pure brain rot. I can barely show it to you because of how much nudity and sex there is. The story is basically about a washed-up wrestler who wants to hook up with a stripper, but then has to go on a mission to save her when she gets kidnapped by an evil scientist. As much as I love the classic art style and admittedly awesome level of animation, the story is a complete waste of time and the characters all suck, minus the talking gorilla voiced by Tom Kenny and the stripper voiced by Rosario Dawson. Yes, the voice of Ahsoka. Besides that, it relies on toilet humor for all of its comedy, but none of it is funny, and none of it is needed. Meanwhile, you have a show like Harvey Birdman, which also uses plenty of adult humor, but it doesn't use it as a replacement for good writing. In fact, there's one episode about X the Eliminator trying to kill Harvey as a failed assassin, and minus one running gag about going number 2, there's practically zero toilet humor and actually no swears if I remember correctly. And that's a show from Adult Swim, where all of the shows are known for swearing. Plus there's plenty of other examples like this. South Park is notorious for adult humor, but its best episode, Make Love Not Warcraft, is weirdly one of its cleanest episodes. My all-time favorite show, Trailer Park Boys, made its brand with curse words, but it fell off in the later seasons when they made the whole point of every joke about outlandish swears. On the other end of this conversation, there's also shows like The Owl House that appeal to fans of Hazbin Hotel even though they're meant for kids, because they focus on mature themes without the use of swears or sex or poop jokes. It just goes to show that you don't actually need adult language to have an adult show. More often than not, swearing just ruins what would otherwise be perfectly good writing. Okay, so if adult language doesn't make something funny, then what does? To answer that, all we need to understand are the 3 elements of every good joke. Usually people will tell you that every joke has 2 elements: the setup and then the punchline, the funny statement, and the way you prepare the audience for that funny statement. In the case of crude humor, the buildup is the difference between a joke that's actually kind of smart and a joke that's just brainless. This is why crude humor feels so stupid in shows like Hazbin Hotel or more famously Big Mouth, because they just drop F-bombs and poop jokes with no setup and expect them to be naturally funny. To be fair, I do like Hazbin Hotel a lot more than Big Mouth. A lot of the crude humor is actually really funny when there's proper setup. But the reason people say the show is cringe is because for every smart joke, there's even more times where a character swears just for the sake of swearing. The swearing is unnecessary, so it feels distracting and honestly annoying. That being said, for a show like Panty and Stocking, where the main appeal is the sex and swearing, obviously it's necessary to have those things. But it feels relatively smarter in this show because it is necessary and because there's proper setup. And that's the key to having adult humor that's smart. It's just a matter of good writing and creativity. One of the best examples of this are the classic Looney Tunes cartoons. Granted, they're not adults, but they appeal to the same unhinged impulses. Instead of swears and sex, they appeal to fans of graphic violence. But that's just it. The best part of a Bugs Bunny cartoon isn't the violence. It's the writing that goes into the jokes. For example, in the famous Duck Amuck cartoon, you watch Daffy get maimed and humiliated for the entire show, and it all builds up to the reveal that Bugs was torturing him the whole time. And just as we pan away from Daffy crashing out, we hear Bugs say, "Ain't I a stinker?" A whole show of Daffy abuse, but the best part is watching Bugs shamelessly admit that he's a hater. That's the beauty of good buildup. You can also see this in the Rabbit Fire cartoon. It's one of the most violent Looney Tunes cartoons, but the violence isn't the best part. That's because the writers only use the violence as payoff for good writing and don't rely on it. For example, in one scene, they're set up when Elmer Fudd says his gun is all out of bullets, and it builds up when Daffy takes the gun and looks right down the barrel. Now, you might say that the punchline is that he gets shot, but that's not it. The punchline is that he found out there was a bullet after he got shot. The violence is just that little pinch of salt that makes the joke better. And that's all you need. Setup and punchlines. Okay, but you said 3 things. And I didn't forget about it, because the third thing a joke needs that everyone forgets is delivery. And delivery is just another way to say execution. The reason this is so important is because you can have the best joke in the world, but you still need to deliver it the right way or else it flops. The reason graphic violence is funnier in cartoons is because of the delivery. It's not quite as silly when it's not in a cartoon. When it comes to Panty and Stocking, the delivery carries a lot of the swears because it's in Japanese. So it's funny to hear swears in English, just like it's funny to hear Joseph swear in Stardust Crusaders. And even in the English dub, when you have Panty swearing like a sailor in English, it still works because she's an openly trashy character, so it just adds to her personality. In Hazbin Hotel, the characters are trashy in the sense that they're all demons living in hell, but they're not all open sluts or drug addicts, so the delivery doesn't always work. In fact, think of them what you will, but Trash Taste made a good point a while back when they said American swearing just sounds cringe, which, as much as I hate to say it, is exactly right. Unless you're from Texas or New York or you have a similar accent, most people think American swears just sound cringe. I hate to say this to all of you beautiful intellectuals in California, but you guys can't swear for shit. And when you have people who sound like that constantly swearing, that's when you get that kind of response to Hell of a Boss and Hazbin Hotel, which only brings us back to my earlier point about knowing your audience. Maybe if you live in California or you're 13 years old, then the swearing in Hazbin Hotel sounds fine. But for most of the world, it just sounds cringe. And especially when you're a major animated show on Amazon Prime, you need to appeal to viewers who don't sound or talk like that. And that's the difference between smart humor and brain rot. Hazbin Hotel and similar shows remind us that sometimes less is more. You can use swears, sex, and violence, but they aren't replacements for good writing. And a large part of being a good writer is knowing your audience. Panty and Stocking is utter nonsense, but Studio Trigger deliberately appeals to viewers who want a show where they can shut their brain off and enjoy silly jokes. They don't insult viewers with lazy writing, but they also don't force in mature themes to hold on to some label of adult animation. And that's because being adult is overrated. As we can see, it's more important to be fun and creative.